So there's this group of guys sitting in a day room. Might be a prison, but somehow it seems too nice for that. They're watching a TV movie about a stalker pestering a female. She's in the police shop talking to a sergeant about just what can be done and about this bozo, when the sergeant says, "Until this guy actually does something, there's nothing we can do." At that point, the room erupts in gales of braying laughter. Thighs are slapped. What is wrong with these men? Do they think it's funny that this woman is in danger from a stalker? As if that's not enough, these men, it turns out, are labeled sexually violent predators. And they have been committed to this, a mental institution. You may think that you now know why these men are laughing. It must be because they strongly identify with the stalker, and they're gleeful at his ability to evade law enforcement. But you'd be wrong. They're really laughing at what the police sergeant has said, because they know from bitter personal experience that in today's America, you may be imprisoned for life, not for what you have done, say a murder or two, but for what you might do, so long as the details of the crime entail a sexual dimension. When you start talking about sexual crimes and their penalties, most people's eyes begin to glaze over with indifference. It is widely held that these people do not deserve the rights common to ordinary people. The law, however, makes no such distinction. Pure, cussed dangerousness alone, sexual or otherwise, is not sufficient ground to remove liberty from a person. If this were true, you can be sure we would have developed an American gulag indistinguishable from the Soviets during the Cold War, or a system like the Germans had with their final solution during World War II. The dangerous and unlovely would simply have long ago become the disappeared. Distinction can be made, however, when such a person is dangerous because he or she has a current mental disorder, as opposed to someone who's merely a criminal. The difference is that one person wants to do it, the other can't not do it. If it can be proven that the dangerous behavior is motivated by a mental disorder, and that the mental disorder is ongoing, that person can be placed in a mental facility, ostensibly for treatment, for just as long as it can be said that they have a mental disorder. Now, you might be able to see right off that if only Stepford doctors are hired to do the defining, it might be possible to build an empire of sorts using the Department of Mental Health as a convenient structure. Stepford doctors, by the way, are doctors who do what they're told. And yes, long-suffering listener, there are such. The question is then raised, how can we determine the presence of a current mental disorder? Is it difficult? We pay psychiatrists and psychologists hefty chunks of money to deal with these questions. Is it because finding the truth about mental disorders is so puzzling that no ordinary person could ever hope to? Are all practicing psychologists so far above us as to be gods? Well, as it turns out, there's hope for us mere mortals. There are numerous books on the subject, and they are not that hard to understand. They inform us that in order to diagnose the presence of a mental disorder, signs must be identified, which are clear indicators of the mental disorder in question. Moreover, there must be symptoms to go along with the signs. Finally, there has to be some sort of history attesting to the presence of the above two indicators. Some of these books even give concrete examples of what a sign or a symptom is. Maxman and Ward, in Essential Psychopathology and Its Treatment, published in '97, tells us that a symptom of a coronary disease, for instance, is chest pain, and a sign of it would be a heart attack. Let's see what this might mean in actual practice. Let's suppose you're a psychologist. Some guy stumbles into your office and plops himself down on your couch and begins to tell you that he's had fantasies, sexual in nature, involving rubbing up against strangers in the subway. He says he's actually been doing this for a year or two, and even though he wants to, he can't stop. You investigate his background and discover that he has been arrested twice in the past for this behavior. Well, this provides you with signs, symptoms, and a history of fraudurism. But what if he came into your office, let's suppose, and divulged in the course of treatment for, say, sexual impotence, that long ago, and for quite a long period, he engaged in exactly the same behavior as outlined above? Nevertheless, 20 years ago, all by himself, he came to understand that his behavior was harming others, and it wasn't really getting him what he wanted. So he stopped. Could you then diagnose him with a current mental disorder? Not at all. How could you? Why would you? Well, you might, if you thought your livelihood depended on it. If you thought you were doing society a favor, since the people you were doing this to are reviled and not considered human anyway. And if you thought highly of your profession's ability to predict human behavior in spite of its miserable record of success in that field, you might do it. But one thing is certain. You could never claim the high moral ground in doing so. Perhaps that is the real reason Coalinga State Hospital is finding it troublesome to locate professional staff. Maybe most folks who are approached with a scheme are smarter and more ethical than it's assumed that they are, and they just will not stoop that low. Most of the men trapped at Coalinga as sexually violent predators have not displayed any signs or symptoms of any mental disorder for many years, sometimes for as many as 20 or 30. Now, there are people at Coalinga who are termed sexually violent predators who have come to understand how harmful their behavior was, and further, how ineffective it was in getting what they really wanted. Many times it's merely the passage of time that produces this main effect. Every study that's ever looked carefully at the significance of advanced age on recidivism, that's being arrested for the same crime again, comes to the same conclusion. Not much happens after 60 years of age. I hope you see now why we think that Coalinga's refusal to provide initial clinical assessments is to us a critical enough issue to go on strike. Because an assessment would have to provide something like evidence of signs or symptoms to make the diagnosis current, rather than just rehashing history, as they've been doing for the last 12 years. Without current signs and symptoms, all that's left is history, sometimes as old as 20 or 30 years. We want to go home to be with our families. We have done our time in prison, and we deserved it. It was for crimes willfully done, not for behaviors over which we had no control. If we have a current mental disorder, we do not refuse treatment. We do refuse, however, treatment either for illnesses, mental or otherwise, which we do not have, nor for which exist signs or symptoms. It was not long ago in this country that you could write in a movie the lines this article opened with. Until this guy actually does something, there is nothing we can do. Sadly, we in this country are giving away our freedoms, and this is just one of them.